I'm Desiree First. I'm very happy to moderate this panel, which happens at the POPUPLAB, which I think is the first event also here. And this event also inaugurates a little bit this warm-up session towards the State Festival, which will start next week. So please make sure that you all grab a flyer and come to this amazing festival. So this is a first snippet of what is going to happen in the next days. And also now, just to look back a little bit what happened today before this panel discussion. So the last 10 hours a workshop took place here in this room. Some of you also had the chance to already see some outcomes of it. And it was a workshop on gastronification, which means basically, as far as I understood, a process or a method to translate data, like data representations into recipes for sorbets. And these sorbets actually also were produced and will be served for free later on. So that's something to look forward to. After a hot discussion, hopefully some ice cream for us. But before we switch to this food for thought, maybe bear with us and let me introduce this wonderful panelists of today. And first, let me introduce Jonathon Keats. He's so nice to join us via Skype today. I hope that the connection will also stay with us. And he's the initiator and creator of this idea of gastronification, and he's an experimental philosopher and artist. And he will also tell us later a little bit what he's going to do at the State Festival. Then on the far end, we have Nina Samuel, who is a curator and art historian based at the moment at the Centrum for Literature in Berlin. And she works on visual epistemologies in the field of complex dynamics and fractal geometry and drawing as a mode of thinking. So I'm very interested in that. Then we have David Marx, who also was with us at the workshop today, and he's a creative head inventor and food designer and the founder of the Science Kitchen here in Berlin, which is a food lab where science meets, science meets haute cuisine. And they also have a thought house that I saw online, and it states that eating, thinking, and being are one, which I think is like the perfect sentence that we can write over this panel today. And then we have Ricardo, who is a participant of today's workshop, and he has a background in architecture and art and design, I think, and he will also tell us a little bit about what happened today. But first, to bring us all onto common grounds, I would like to ask Jonathon, what is gastronification? What brought you to come up with this theory, and also to think about how to create workshops, and maybe also say some words about what we can expect at the State Festival, when you will also be present finally with us. So you have the word, Jonathon.
I think at this point you can probably tell me better than I can tell you what gastronification is, since you've done far more of it than I have. But I'll give you a little bit of background in terms of my own interest in the idea and my own explorations that have led up to this workshop, and getting feedback on my voice here. So I'm going to turn off my sound in order to be able to talk. So I will just watch for you to start signaling if I've been speaking for too long by waving frantically. So can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Good. I got interested in gastronification because I was already very interested in data visualization. A phenomenon which seems to be more and more pervasive as time goes on in terms of trying to be able to cope with big data and to deal with increasingly complex models for trying to understand increasingly complex phenomena. And visualization has really gone a long way in terms of the sophistication of visualizations and insights that come out of them. And yet, to me, as I was looking at all of this, there still remain many incredibly difficult, even intractable problems that researchers face and that potentially could be addressed through other means. I'm thinking of everything from trying to understand the nature of consciousness to understanding what dark energy is to trying to model all the complexities of the climate in a time of climate change. And so thinking about that, I started to think about other ways to be able to encounter data or encounter models. And one that came to mind for me was digestion, was to do so by way of the enteric nervous system.
Jonathan,
And
maybe just
sorry,
I think right now it's a little bit hard to understand you, and we will try to call you maybe again, because this morning it worked fine, but it's hard right now to... Now it's a connection, I think. We will call you again right now, yeah?
Okay, that's good.
So what I understood so far is that gastronification is about to find a different mode of engaging with data, and just to somehow also get another perspective on science and representations and complex phenomena, because I think especially Jonathon also worked a little bit before on topics like climate change that are very complex and hard to grasp, and especially this immersive visualization of these complex problems, I think, is very hard to sometimes really understand, and also think about the consequences and relations to our everyday life. So a lot of scientists try right now, and with help also sometimes of artists and designers, to find novel ways to engage with these data and with these novel findings in science, to also not have the public freeze in anxiety, but to somehow also show scopes for actions and stuff. So I was just with my what I understood so far from your approach, but let's try again, Jonathon. Just continue.
Okay, so start from the top. Okay, so I have been interested in data visualization. I need to turn off my sound again because I'm getting that feedback effect. So just wave at me if you can't hear me or spoken for too long. I've been interested in data visualization for a long time, and in the potential the data visualization has shown in terms of being able to provide access to incredibly complex data sets, incredibly large data sets, and incredibly complex models that have been derived from those data sets in areas of science ranging from astrophysics to genetics. On the one hand, it seems like we're at a time in history where this system is leading to incredible insights and breakthroughs. And on the other hand, we seem to be at an impasse in terms of many of the most deep and many of the most significant phenomena in terms of understanding them, even with the advantages of data visualization. I'm thinking of everything from consciousness to dark energy to a grand unified theory to some sort of attempt at reconciling quantum physics and relativity. And so it got me thinking about whether perhaps we might learn from visualization about the importance of confronting data or observing and interacting with models in modes that might not be necessarily purely mathematical, but that perhaps visualization might not be the only way to do so. That other which
you froze.
The world particularly interests me is digestion. Sorry, I'm turning this back on. Yes?
Can you hear me? You froze for a second, but now you are back on.
Okay. Okay, so gastronification is what I came up with. I came up with it not totally arbitrarily, even though it may seem that way. And the reason why I think the gut is such an interesting and potentially powerful modality or surface by which to be able to confront and process big data and complex models is that the enteric nervous system is a remarkably complex system in terms of, first of all, the sheer number of neurons, which is second only to the brain, but also for the fact that the enteric nervous system is, by and large, the way in which we get the sort of gut feelings that we have. In other emotional in terms of its understanding. So, in a sense, potentially very different from the way in which the brain, by way of the eye, is going to process data that we see. And so I started to think about whether perhaps I could find the equivalent of colors or shapes that are used in visualization that would specifically trigger certain receptors within gut and would allow for a visceral experience that is true to the way in which the enteric nervous system works of any kind of data. And so I started to look through the literature, and in fact, there are quite a number of chemicals that have effects on different receptors. And ultimately, I managed to find 12 different receptors for which I could identify a chemical that seemed uniquely to have an effect on one of those 12. And therefore, to set up a group of ingredients that could be used potentially as a way of representing data or representing a model. And so that led me to then try on my own to start formalizing climate change and climate change models in terms of ways that they could be digested. And I decided to do that, I think, because, first of all, climate seemed like it was something that people would be interested in, or at least they should be. And secondly, because it's so difficult for people to digest at two different levels, both the researchers themselves in terms of their ability to understand the complexity of these interactions between greenhouse gases and aerosols and albedo and so forth. And secondly, because it is so incredibly difficult to communicate to the public, and the public really needs to be in on it in order for any sort of climate action to take place. So therefore, I went about an initial attempt to take this set of ingredients ranging from sucrose or table sugar to vanillin or vanilla extract to mint, all of which have these effects on different receptors within the enteric nervous system. And so working with the Science Kitchen, which really saved the day because I don't know how to make sorbet. I don't really know how to cook much of anything, to be honest. I managed somehow to end up at a point where we're here today having this conversation and we'll be presenting 3 different sorbets that will represent 3 different states of a future climate, depending on 3 different levels of greenhouse gas emissions. And it's kind of a first test case, though actually you're preempting it with a workshop today, which I'm delighted by, and which I think is a great way in which to open up what we're talking about by virtue of the work that you've been doing all day in terms of gastronifying syphilis and happiness. I think 2 incredibly interesting data sets that are potentially at opposite ends of the spectrum, though at some level perhaps also interrelated. So that's where we are right now, is I think at this starting point for thinking about and looking at how gastronification might potentially operate as a real and viable system within the sciences and also science communication. But also, since my background is, as I said, not in sorbet making, nor is it in science, but in philosophy, I'm equally or perhaps more interested in looking at the implications of this, basically looking at the interrelationship between how we perceive the world and how we understand it, what it might mean to use an emotionally based system in order to be able to understand what ordinarily would be addressed through a more rational system of the frontal cortex, perhaps. And what it means both from the standpoint of when you have to confront what you already think that you know in terms that are unfamiliar, in other words, the act of gastronification, and also when it is communicated to others, what happens in terms of the spaces that are opened up, in terms of the in terms of all of the gaps, all the unknowns that might potentially lead to deeper insights of some sort, or at least might lead to new questions, might potentially, in terms of climate change or understanding the relationship between syphilis and bacterial infection, or happiness for that matter, that might lead us to new insights. So there's a very brief overview, and I'll turn my sound back on so that you can start talking to others.
Super. Thank you so much, Jonathan. I think what became also very clear is that one strength of gastronification is that you somehow offer a comparison with these three different recipes that stand for three possible scenarios, and through tasting these three different scenarios and comparing them, you can also give the people the possibility to situate themselves towards these different scenarios in a different way, in new ways. And I think this. You want to say something?
And I think especially because of the act of sharing a meal, that is so embedded in terms of our culture and where our culture comes from, that it allows for a different dynamic of relationship and of conversation.
Yeah, very much. And I think that is also comes together with this this more methodological point of view, to try out new ways to explore different methodologies, which also I think was very interesting today for us at the workshop. Even though I couldn't see everything, but as far as I know, we had participants from various backgrounds, and they all came probably here with very different knowledge bases and different methodologies. And so I would like to ask Ricardo now to tell us a little bit of how did you hear about this workshop? What was your expectation, and what did the gastronification also offered you maybe for your own practice?
Okay. So first, when I heard about this gastronification process, I was very, I didn't know what to expect, because I didn't know how to connect this data to obtain something out of them in a way that could fit like the scientific parameters, or let's say scientific process. But as I said, what I really like from this process is that basically you interpret this data. So all the ingredients that we link to some data sets are linked in a way that like presuppose an interpretation of this data made by us, by the participants, and by also Daniel helped us with the ingredients. So it was a nice process of combination. And then we came out with this idea of using this happiness index, global happiness index, developed a few years ago from some researchers financed by the United Nations. And we got lucky that we got this data set that was based on like 7 different parameters. And for each one of those parameters, we chose an ingredient, basically. And this process of deciding which ingredient would be linked to which parameter of the research was something that we basically did by ourselves. So there's no, let's say, scientific mean of this part of the process. But the outcome was very, very interesting because you, as Jonathon said, it's a different kind of process from data visualization where you just see clearly the link with like scientific data and what is visualized. Here is more like an abstract way of interpret science, let's say. That's what I got from the whole experience. And was very funny because we got, let's say, our hands dirty with the ingredients and with the data at the same time. And yes, was a very nice experience. I really enjoyed this workshop.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's interesting to think about this this level of abstraction in different kinds of representations, and also how engaging with the question of abstraction. Thank you. Is also connected to what kind of knowledge is being created. So this way of creating knowledge is very much connected to the tools that you are using. And I think that Nina maybe could say some words from her art historical perspective towards this connection of going from stuff coming from an idea towards first sketches and drawings, and how this act of doing science also becomes part of the knowledge creation. So I hand over.
Okay. So thanks for the invitation first of all. As you said already, I'm an art historian. So, but I'm not a very classical art historian. So I'm not very often working on Rembrandt or on other very classical art historical topics. But I'm actually working on the intersection of art and science already since a longer time. Now this could mean different things. What I'm not doing is I'm not really have been interested in the question of artists using scientific concepts for their works. I've not really working on this. I've also not been very interested on scientists making their scientific results more arty or maybe more aesthetic. So both of these directions is not what I have been interested so far. But I have been interested in a moment where art and science, as far as I think, come the closest together, which is actually the moment of creation. So the moment when what the Greek called the poiesis, the making, when representations are taken in the hands, when the artist or the scientist sits at the desk and engages and manipulates things and interacts with them and produces representations. Doesn't have to be visual representations, can be audio representations, video or models or whatever kind of objects or things are available to produce. When those moments happen, that there's a direct interaction between things and theories, so that thoughts can emerge. I'm not sure in which direction I have to look. Look in this little camera there? Okay. Okay. So this is where I think where art and science come really close. It is the moment when this creativity happens in the interaction with things. And this is also why I think in this workshop or in this thought experiment that you proposed is actually at the core of what I have been interested so far, because you kind of initiate this process of working with different representations, starting from a scientific model, and then initiating a process to going through different stages of drawings and flowcharts and developing a scientific model that ends up at something completely different at the end as a sorbet or something we can eat. So what the theory of science has discussed very long, the question, how do chains of representations work as a tool to develop thoughts and as a tool to develop theory in science, is something that we can, if we go in the other room and look at the table with full of stuff and ingredients and sketches, which we can see happening here during this workshop. I've actually talked to one participant, and I've taken this notebook, which happened during the workshop today. So if you go through this notebook, you can see very well the creative process from a few graphs, just a sketch, and then colors come in. So you have really like a picture book of what you would find in theory of science, how representations interact with each other. So you have a real classical chain of representation in this notebook from one of the participants. So now what is interesting, or what is the question, what does it mean if the last step of these chains of representations end in the stomach? So is this is this a comment on these chains of representations? Is this the end of the representation, or is this, could we say that it's an invitation to think about what comes after the digestion of these representations? Is maybe then the theory that has gone through all these steps in the notebook that we have seen then in the body of the scientist and might produce new representations, because the body of the scientist who has eaten the sorbet then maybe is embodied of the theory, is an embodied model of the theory and creates other representations afterwards. Is this maybe what we can think? It's just an invitation, I would say. Think about how the body can become part of this chain, which normally is excluded. So, and this is what I find, and this is an open question, and this is also a very humorous question in a way. I see also lots of humor in this invitation to think, lots of freedom to think and humor also. And I would say that the question stays open, but in any way, what is important to draw from this experiment is that the body, as part of the experimental setting, has been underestimated throughout the history of science. So the body is always part of the experimental setting, but has not really been discussed very extensively in the history of science. So mostly it has been excluded because under the paradigm of objectivity, the body, it is said that the body will more hinder the machines of working correctly. So it has to be excluded from the experimental setting, even though it surely directly influences on the experimental setting. So I think this is something that really has to be investigated more, and I think this experiment with the sorbets gives a good could be an engine to ask these questions more. I'm meandering around my topics that I wanted to end somewhere else, actually. I wanted to talk also about the moments of representations, for example, drawings or other moments of representation that I've investigated. But I would say at this moment I stop here, and maybe we come back later to drawings or other representations.
Thank you. I really love that you pointed out this this need of somehow thinking anew about the body, because especially when we are confronted with the over visualization of everything, and also like all these recent discussions about artificial intelligence, etc. I think we often forget that we embody our world, and that we use certain tools that become part of our body in order to produce knowledge. So I think that's a really nice point to also discuss later, maybe in the panel. But I have to point this also towards David, because I think in your practice, the sensual experience of food, of cooking, and experimentation and knowledge creation is probably something very basic, and maybe you can give us some insight from your practice.
Nice talk, by the way. There's nothing more to say. Really enjoy the words. Yes, where to start here? First of all, thank you for the invitation. I know that I came very late to the project, not too late, but let's say a bit late. But it was quite interesting to have food so close together with scientists, with presentations, with data transforming into something that's eatable at the end. Of course, by the time I looked at the ingredients, I was a bit shocked, not only astonished, but shocked. I said, okay, well, how can we make a sorbet out of it? You know, I come from let's say, from the taste. I want to make everything delicious and beautiful. And good, of course, not only for the brain, for the stomach as well. So I was shocked. I said, okay, I wanted to quit. I said, no, ask somebody else. But there was no somebody else. I heard from you. So it was just me at the end of this chain. So I decided, okay, let's help. Let's go to round number 1 and see what happens. It is like a journey. It is a door opener to the scientists, to the food makers, to the chefs, to create or to work on something totally new. It is, and I love to open doors. You never know what happens next, and that is not important, not today. But as from what I have learned today, it makes sense. I really would love to keep on working on this, maybe on different levels. We all had lots of fun, by the way, which is good. But yes, to transform data, complex information, data sheets, diagrams, whatsoever, into something that's eatable would help somehow to transfer information to kids, to other scientists, to chefs, maybe to understand the problems like the climate change or something like this much easier. And yes, like what you said, what comes next now, we've all eaten the ice cream, the sorbet today. There is something going on in my stomach. I cannot tell if this is good or bad. Maybe we have to chat tomorrow and I will let you know. But something happens, and of course that interests me a lot because I'm a fan of what we say the gut feeling, and that there is a connection to the brain, we all know, but PowerPoint and all the other presentation tools we know, what can I say? You trust numbers more than your own gut feeling, which is an instinct. And maybe this can help the German managers to come back and to trust their feelings, their gut feelings, more than the numbers. Because we can see when we look around in the world that to trust numbers is not a good solution any longer. So we have to come with something new, and maybe that is just one thing to work on. And it's very interesting. And yeah, I definitely will have some more workshops with my clients. Yeah, that is really what I can say.
And maybe going from there further, a question to both of you, because the list of ingredients came from you, Jonathon. I would be interested in this relation of the initial value represented in the data graphs before, and the ingredients, and in what way, how you decided on this initial ingredients, and the question for you, Jonathon, and a question for you, David, what your experience was during the day, if from your perspective, this initial, the scent of the data and the value was somehow still for you connected to the ingredients. But maybe Jonathon first can say something about how you came up with this list.
Sure. Sorry, I'm going to turn off my sound again because I don't hear myself. First, just respond to what was said a moment ago about making things delicious. I think that it would actually be very interesting to turn all of this back around, to give it back to you and say, might we make things delicious at an emotional level, of making sorbet that is not necessarily entirely about how pleasure happens in the tongue, but there be nuanced ways in which it might happen within the gut as well. We create literature, for instance, or music of the gut that would happen through the. Oh. Okay. Let me try again.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe Katharina could try to call you again. And sorry.
Try calling back.
Yeah, Katharina will call you again, but maybe in the meantime,
Okay.
David could just tell us can you tell us from your perspective how this relation, if you experience that presentation.
Yeah, okay, to give you some samples, as you might know, we have ingredients like chili or ginseng, some really extreme tasteful ingredients, and there were some what was the other one? I forget, the Johanniskraut and
Okay,
Flügelfrucht.
video again.
Okay.
Is the sound okay now?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Okay, then.
Okay. Do you want me to start over or to continue where I was?
So maybe
Which?
Start again because I think.
Okay. Turning the sound off again. So what I was saying was that I think that this idea of of making something that is delicious is really interesting to me as well. So that not only do I see gastronification as potentially being a way in which to process data or models about our world, but there might also equally be a way of thinking about it within a culinary tradition and of extending that culinary tradition not only to address the tongue, but also, or the palate, but also to address the gut in a more direct way. So I'm really interested in further exploring this in terms of a literature of the gut or a music of the gut that could, at a purely artistic level, engage those receptors. And so I'll use that as a way then of doing a very poor segue to why I chose the ingredients that I did and why they probably are by no means the best ones, and how we're going to get to a point in the future, I hope, where it will be a lot more palatable and a lot less work for you to make it so that people don't want to gag when they taste whatever it is that we make. I did a bit of a literature review of a lot of research that's happening right now in terms of the receptors in the gut. And it is pharmacology. Oh, off again? Yes. Where? I'm sorry, where was I? Okay. Okay. So I was saying, in terms of the selection of ingredients, I think that there's a lot of potential to come up with ingredients that will be far more palatable, as well as to provide a much greater diversity of ingredients as time goes on. At present, we're limited by what has been researched and what has been published in the literature. And there's actually, just in the past few years, been quite a lot of work within the realm of understanding which phytochemicals, or in other words, which foods have what effect on which receptors. And this is mostly research that's happening within the realm of pharmacology, trying to understand how herbal remedies work, for instance. And so as a result, I was able to put together a master list of what chemicals had been tested, and then to start to work by process of elimination, because many chemicals will have an effect on more than one receptor. And I wanted to uniquely be able to trigger an effect in one receptor for each of the chemicals that we use and to have as many chemicals as possible in order to be able to represent as many different values as possible. So, for instance, I believe ginger was one which I had to exclude because it has an effect on multiple receptors. So I put everything together and ended up with an incredibly strange list that ranged from relatively natural things to go in a sorbet, like sugar, to some very strange things indeed. Like I think that just looking at my list here, we have, for instance, well, cinnamon is not so strange, nor is vanillin, but hyperforin perhaps is not usually used by ice cream makers these days. It's what you find in St. John's wort. And so that has an effect on TRPC6 is the name of the receptor. And there was no other way in which to be able to work with that receptor other than that or some even more difficult to find or potentially noxious chemicals. So it was a matter of trying to find chemicals that were accessible, that were legal, because as it turns out, cannabis is excellent chemical to work with because it uniquely has an effect on only one receptor, but I don't think that we could legally get away with it, at least at this point. So it was a matter of finding receptors and chemicals that pertain to those receptors where the chemicals were legal, available, potentially palatable, and then where I could identify a given receptor for each chemical and could determine based on the literature that the chemical did not seem to have an effect on any of the other receptors we were working with. And it's highly imperfect. I suspect that as the research continues in this field, not mine, but that of scientists who are working on understanding the intestine, that it will be found that some of these chemicals actually need to be eliminated from our palate because it's entirely possible that just hasn't been detected in terms of having an effect on more than one receptor. And I think we'll also find new chemicals to work with that we don't know of right now. So it's very much at the starting point, and it's very much of an exploratory process. And maybe there is a placebo effect of understanding that will take place. But if it takes placebo effect in order for us to reach new insights or to get to some point of actually acting on the changing climate for that matter, then maybe the placebo effect is not such a bad thing after all.
And how was that experience for you, Gavin, as someone who really knows a little bit about of taste and how it's coming together with different tastes and recipes?
Yes, I would like to say that we have to learn how to handle some points here. First of all, our stomach is not a white plain paper. So you cannot just come and draw whatever you want on top of it. You know, for example, if we work with chili, like what we did today, and we're working with large numbers, of course you can have large numbers on a paper or at the computer, but you cannot just give me a lot of chili to increase the effect in my body. You know, the stomach is not stupid, so is the body. So it stops. It stops. It says it doesn't take it all. For example, with chili or ginseng or vitamin C or lemon. So there's like an overdose is not possible. Let's put it this way. So we cannot just transform large numbers into large quantities of chili that has the same effect on my body. The second is, okay, what have you eaten before? So the stomach is not empty, it's not the plain white paper, so you have eaten something, so or together, the ingredients together may have some other effects on the body than just eaten singular. Yeah, of course, coming to the taste and ice cream, I would like to say that you can have a presentation nicely done, or you can have some ugly presentations, like the stupid, boring PowerPoint presentation. They all look the same. I would say that's the same with cooking and with recipes. Some could be delicious, some are not so delicious. And here we have to say it's okay, it's in between. There's still, some of them were delicious today, but it would make things easier, because when you try to sell ice cream, or when you give ice cream to the audience for free, they already expect something. And that from now, the reaction starts, you know, from here to the mouth to the stomach. When they hear, oh, we're talking about a lemon sorbet, there are more reactions here and in the mouth than in the brain. But we started something we cannot stop. So, and the participants and our guests, they get the ice cream, and it's not that they were disappointed, because they know that there's something strange going on. But of course, we cannot tell the whole story here. You know, there are too many problems. You know, we're so individual, and ice cream is a happy maker. This is why we are so happy to go for the happy making ice index that's so close to the ice cream itself. But still, we have to handle some problems here as well. But still, I would like to say, yeah, maybe step by step, I would like to keep on working, but maybe just to transform data or such information into something that could be delicious and eatable and understandable for kids, for parents, just for me to do step by step. And then to go deeper into discussion and deeper into science, and then coming back to you, Jonathon, to really understand what's going on here. And does it fit to the data, or is this something we have to keep separate from the story we just been transferred? So, yeah. But again, we open a door today. And let's see what will be next. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it became very clear that gastronification is a very subjective experience, a very subjective method, but interesting for us, and also probably for the different practices because of that, because science and science communication today targets more towards the subject, the individual, and trying to find novel forms to communicate these very complex phenomena, and to have this moment of initial thought maybe given to the individual, that can then maybe think about the connection of what is happening on macro scales, and the own actions on the everyday and macro levels. So I think it's a nice experimentation. Yeah.
So just 2 sentences. Of course, we are pioneers here. Not so bad. And I was astonished about myself. By the time we come to the first numbers, and this was turned into a recipe, so I can read from the board that this is a recipe now. I was a bit proud of our team here, but it made me happy. It was something I never done before, and I wrote thousands of recipes. I work together with some of the best chefs in the world. We do crazy food shows. I thought we did it all, but no. So this opens a complete new door and window for me, for workshops, for food shows, whatsoever. So I'm very happy about that. And I have to say thank you, Jonathon, to let me know. Yeah.
Okay, before I come to the last question, because we have to end relatively on time at 7:30, I would like to ask the audience, since we are talking about also the audience, if there are any questions towards the panelists or also the workshop participants right now. Yeah, there's some question? Yeah?
Hi there. Well, thanks a lot for, we got a try of the ice cream already, and it was definitely an interesting experience. And I was wondering if this is trying to transmit data, and if the data is not necessarily good, if you're talking about stuff like climate change or syphilis or so, then is there really a necessity for the end product? It seems somewhat weird that the end product then should be tasty, when if you look at the data of a certain subject and it doesn't really look that great, or it isn't really good data in the sense of like positive data.
I think that there's Um, there's enormous polemical possibility in terms of gastronification, which I think is actually one of the great risks as opposed to one of the great potentialities. That is to say that I think it would be very easy to make a climate sorbet that was increasingly disgusting as you got to higher levels of greenhouse gas emissions. And at the level of rhetoric, that might be more effective. But to me, it goes totally contrary to the direction that I hope this project will take. Because to me, it's not really about trying to make an argument through sorbet, but trying to lead to some sort of internalized understanding. And in the case of scientific foundations for something such as climate change, in democratic world, in democratic countries where we need to be able to act on what we know, it really is important that we find ways in which get past rhetoric in order to be able to have some sort of a genuine conversation, reach some sort of genuine understanding. And too often, science is at a level of sophistication that totally is inaccessible to the public. And as a result, the public is told simply, just trust that this person has this authority because it's a certain level of scientific credibility that comes with that opinion. I think that we need to find ways in which to bridge the divide between the scientists who are in the trenches and who are really understanding at a level of devoting their lives to analyzing data, and the public, where the public needs to get to some level of understanding as well. And so, to me, palatability is neither necessary nor is it to be avoided, but rather, I think that we need to start from the standpoint of how do we find other ways of accessing people's minds in the fully embodied sense, and can gastronification get us there?
Maybe to give you an answer, because it's a good question, but let's put it this way. When you do a presentation about syphilis, does the presentation has to look nice? Does it has to look ugly because it's syphilis, or does it has to look like, does it has to come with shocking pictures? It's the same question, right? So I would say design helps. If it looks nice, it helps maybe. And the same is with the taste. It could help. It's like what you said, Jonathon, it's not necessary here, but maybe it could help. It makes things easier, and that's the only reason here. Yeah.
Any more questions? Yes,
Thank you. Just listening to what you have to say, Jonathon, I guess the conclusion is therefore that our minds are just not located in our brains, that there is research to support that our minds are in fact in our guts, and perhaps they're in other parts, it's in other parts of our bodies as well. Is that a conclusion or an idea or a hypothesis that you're working on? Do you think that we have a mind in our digestive systems? Is that a proven thing for you?
This is not my own theory. That the enteric nervous system operates at the level of processing data in the form of what we're eating, and that it works in tandem with the brain in order for us to have the ability to process what we consume. Where I come in is at the level of saying that that's a lot of research happening right now, that kind of the level of understanding physiologically of how the human body works, and that I can build on top of that by saying that the enteric nervous system has this incredibly powerful ability, which is necessary for our survival. Could we then take and take a sort of a secondary use of it on top of its sheer survival, its sheer function within survival? So in the same way that our eyes were initially probably evolved largely for the standpoint of our being able to avoid danger and forage for necessary food. But we now use our eyes for all sorts of other things, ranging from looking at art to looking at data sets. Could we do the same thing with our gut?
Okay.
Maybe what I could contribute to this point from my research is that in the same way that representations or things contribute to our knowledge formation, there are scientists that also report that the body is a tool during their research. I, for example, worked with mathematicians and physicians working in chaos theory that report that sensation that they had, for example, spiraling threads around their nose that they had always had as a body sensation, contributed to their ideas what shapes the specific equation should have in space. And after the sensation, they actually found the equation and they found the shapes. So there are reports on scientists that take these sensations serious, or that work with, for example, other methods like stereoscopic movies that that you can see as a representation in space that interact with your own body also during research, and methods of, for example, haptic experiments with rolling paper or stuff. All these things where you really interact with your body that can be really part of the experimental system and that can really contribute to theory formation. So I don't think we have only to think about the gut and if the gut can think, but in general, just to think about the whole body and in which way whole body sensations can really be part of the research and can really be part of even of research that is thought to be super abstract like mathematics and physics. Even in this realm, it can really contribute to theory formation, even in fields where people would say it's super immaterial, but actually if you work with mathematicians and physicists, it's not super immaterial. It's really based also on sensations and on sketches and on material things. It can be, of course. There's a material side, but it really can be more based in these things that we would maybe expect. So I would say there are these both sides. One side is the exterior things like sketches and things outside of us, but also really the body that can be part of the experimental system. What I also wanted to add, maybe we should even extend this idea not only to gastronification, but also towards what about choreographication? We dance our data. Or what about scentification? We just smell our data. Or haptification, like we just touch the data. I mean, there are various ways to go. Maybe to work with data in different ways that is not just eating them, but also just using other senses that we could use.
It's just one thing.
And in fact, sonification is one example of this that already is in play, literally. So absolutely, using the ear, that's something that has been explored, for instance, at Xerox PARC for the past couple decades or so, and was one of the influences leading to this level of exploration. But yes, embodiment is, I think, really kind of the key to finding other ways in which to interact with data and to interact with models, since interacting with our world is how we gain knowledge in the first place. So can we do so at other levels? And can we find other ways in which to relate to abstraction in terms of bridging the abstract and the concrete in order to be able to then lead to new ways of thinking?
There's a wonderful quote of the German artist Joseph Beuys, who once said, "Anywhere I think with my knee." I think this captures very well this idea that we can think really with our body parts. Thinking with the knee is always, we should never forget this.
Yeah, just one thing that comes in my mind is there's a nice experiment in America last year or 2 years ago that shows how food can influence the decision that you want to make. There were people asked to make a decision like black and white. I want to make it easy right now. And one part had the chance to drink a coffee, something warm, before they make the decision, and the other part has the option to drink something cold. and it was amazing to see such an effect on the decision that you make. So let's put it this way, all the guys that had a warm drink, they decided to go right, and all the others decided to turn left, just because they had something warm or cold in their stomach. And that easily shows how incredible important as it is to accept that there is a connection, and that it is very important to know more about what you eat and how you can affect your decision or your brain work or your daily life by what you eat. Right?
Yeah, I think it's super fascinating how the different senses play a huge role in how we perceive the world and how we make sense out of it. And maybe just to add that at part of the State Festival, there will also be a smell lab where a colleague of a friend of mine works with smell as part of knowledge creation and smelling data and things like that. So you should maybe also have a look at that. So since we should end really soon, I would like to ask one final question that maybe each panelist can answer very briefly. And maybe we start with Nina. I would just be interested to hear from you. What do you think how future representations in science might look like, if we can just speculate, just very briefly?
Well, I mean, I have mentioned some ideas already. Why not? What about the dancing of the data and the smelling and the haptic? I mean, I don't know. I think these experimental ways should be tried out, especially because visual representations of data, we just are so much surrounded by them. So they have maybe lost a little bit its power, but because they are just everywhere. So I mean, of course, the visual has a high capacity, a high potential to interact with our cognition, just to make us think, but it's just everywhere. So maybe we should just try to go new ways, also just to have fresh new thoughts, because maybe the visual cannot serve anymore for this.
Fresh new thoughts. That's a good point here. Where do they come from? That's the point, right? So what I have learned from the past in my life is that it's always good to be surrounded by good people and different disciplines. And this is because I know from scientists, I know from big brands, they all have the tunnel view, and that kills ideas and new ways, new doors to open. And that means for scientists as well, maybe from time to time, to have some cross-intelligence workshops like what we had today, to be open-minded, to have those new thoughts and ideas, and that's very important for them as well. Yeah.
I have maybe a pessimistic kind of view of the future, which is maybe I think that the visual depiction of reality would be much more linked to the device rather than our imagination would be somehow sized or designed to be visualized somewhere, or rather than on a piece of paper, or yeah. That's how I feel like. But of course, I agree with you that we should think out of the box or out of the device. But I don't know.
Yeah, probably these different approaches go well together and also inform each other. And this is also what you are pointing towards, the reason why we should look for other possibilities maybe. But Jonathon, what do you think? Future science representations, how does it look like?
On the one hand, I think that total immersion might be a future to explore. So as we think about all the different modalities, how can we combine them into something that would be a sum greater than the parts? But I think that equally it's interesting to think about how potentially other organisms might be able to interact with data and models by means such as gastronification, which is to say that like a writing system, for instance, is something that is exclusively accessible to us, as far as we know, species. Gastronification might also be accessible to a whole wide range of organisms. So what would happen if they were to be brought into process of discovery. What sort of discoveries might they make, and how might we communicate with them or understand from them their understanding of our world?
Okay, thank you very much. Since we are already over time a little bit, I would thank everybody now, thank the panelists, thank the organizers, thank the audience for coming, and invite you all to stay a little bit for discussing further over some sorbet that will be served. Jonathon, we see you soon, and we will eat with you as well then, I hope. Okay, thank you very much.